The best way to learn a language? Immersion, living where the language is spoken and using it every day. But if that's not in the cards for you this year, you can still learn a language the second best way, and that's with Babbel. Be a better you in 2024 with Babbel, the science-backed language learning app that actually works. Don't pay hundreds of dollars for private tutors or waste hours on apps that don't really help you speak the language. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are handcrafted by over 200 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Babbel's designed by real people for real conversations. Babbel's tips and tools are approachable, accessible, rooted in real-life situations, and delivered with conversation-based teaching so you're ready to practice what you've learned in the real world. For instance, I've been using Babbel's convenient courses to help me learn basic conversational skills in German while I'm getting ready for a little trip I'm planning. It's not a language I'd ever studied before, but I find the lessons really easy and kind of like hand-holding me through learning a completely new language to me. And it's reassuring to know that with the help of Babbel, I'll be able to greet people, order food, and ask for directions without having to consult language apps while I'm in Deutschland. I'm still learning. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. Babbel has over 16 million subscriptions sold. Plus, all of Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by their 20-day money-back guarantee. Here's a special limited-time deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/vulgar. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/vulgar, spelled BABBEL.com/vulgar. Rules and restrictions may apply. Hello and welcome to Vulgar History. My name is Anne Foster, and this is a feminist women's history comedy podcast. I tried to start the episode by saying something different, and then I got totally messed up. So I really just have to say those words in that order, and that's what we're going to do. So this week is sort of like bonus features, which many of you might know when people would get movies on DVD or on Blu-ray disc. A lot of people still do. But I just know there's some youths listening who've maybe only ever watched things on streaming. I don't know. Anyway, when movies are not on streaming, when you buy a disc, there's special features, like behind the scenes documentaries about the costumes or the making of or whatever. And so this is kind of like a bonus feature for the Hortense Mancini 5-part special. This is keeping up with Les Mazarinettes because it just feels like a plot. I don't know. It's like, sometimes in a book at the end, it's kind of like, and here's what happened to this person, and here's what happened to this person. It's like loose ends, and I can't not tie up the loose ends when they're so fabulous and interesting. So this week, keeping up with Les Mazarinettes. The references for this are Wikipedia, The Affair of the Poisons by Anne Somerset, Love and Louis XIV by Antonia Fraser, and The King's Mistresses by Elizabeth Goldsmith, as well as a website called partylike1660.com. who had an article about Marie Mancini. So 100 years ago, when we did Hortense Mancini Part 1, I talked about Cardinal Mazarin, and the Mazarinettes were his 7 nieces. And then I'm going to include in this episode Philippe, who was his one nephew because he was a cool guy, and I consider him like an honorary Mazarinette, like in the Babysitters Club, how Logan is the boy babysitter. So who are the Mazarinettes? Where do they come from? So we're going to talk about their parents and grandparents. I mean, on the one side, the Mazarin side. On the Mazarin side, the grandparents were Pietro Mazzarino and Hortensia Buffalini. Pietro moved to Rome from Sicily. Hortensia was from Rome, and Hortensia's family, the Buffalinis, were a noble family originally from Umbria who had moved to Rome in the Middle Ages, which I think is just... I love that as a clarification where it's like, okay, so like 100 years ago, because this is the Renaissance. So Hortensia was the goddaughter of her husband's employer, Filippo I Colonna. That's the grandparents. Then they had children, and the children were Cardinal Mazarin and his 2 sisters. So the 2 sisters were the mothers of the Mazarinettes. So they were Hieronima, who is the mother of the 5 Mancini sisters and also Philippe, and Laura Margherita, the mother of the 2 Martinozzi sisters. It is unclear which sister is older because both were like maybe born in 1608 or maybe not. So similar age, presumably. Laura, and I think in Italian it's like Laura. So Laura Margherita married Count Girolamo Martinozzi, and they had 2 daughters, Anna Maria and Laura. There's a number of Lauras in this story. So that's the 2 Martinozzi sisters. Hieronima married Baron Lorenzo Mancini, who was a necromancer and astrologer. So that's a whole other story that I'm not going to dive all the way into this like rabbit hole of who they were, but just know he was cool. And so they had 7 children who survived. There were other children. There's like 3 children who died in infancy. So they're surviving children, the ones we're going to talk about today. Laura, that's the 3rd one. Paul Jules. Oh, actually, no. Paul Jules died as a young man, I think, in battle. So we're not actually talking about Paul Jules. So Laura, Olympia, Marie, Philippe, Hortense, and Marianne. So to keep track, the 7 Mazarinettes, like we have 2 Lauras, 1 Anna Marie, 1 Marianne, and 1 Marie. And although full disclosure, Marie's full name was Anne Marie. So it's a bit like the wives of Henry VIII in the sense of like, you've got multiple Annes and Catherines, but they're all very different. And once you get to know them, you'll remember who is who. We're going to go one at a time. Oldest to youngest is the order we're going to go in. So first up is the 2 Martinozzi sisters. They, just because of who the fathers were, I guess, like the 2 Martinozzis were blonde, whereas the Mancinis had brunette hair, almost all of them. And also the Martinozzi sisters were apparently pliant, or they were like obedient. But I mean, compared to the Mancinis, like a lot of people would seem tame by comparison. Anyway, so the oldest of all the Mazarinettes is Anna Marie Martinozzi. So she and her younger sister, Laura, along with their cousins, other Laura and Olympia, were the first wave of Mazarinettes to head to France. So kind of the oldest siblings went first, and then the younger ones came after. And they headed over shortly after the death of the Mancini sisters' father. So Cardinal Mazarin had summoned them all over there so that he could arrange advantageous marriages for them to sort of like make his legacy be stronger. And I love that that's where this all started, because he's Cardinal Mazarin. Side note, I have said, I think in the last 2 episodes when I'm talking about the Patreon, that I will have or have done So This Asshole Cardinal Mazarin, and I'm here to say no, I did not end up doing that, mostly because his story was just not interesting to me. And this whole podcast and the Patreon podcast, it's all just about me having a good time. And if it's not a fun story for me to read about, it's not going to be fun for you to listen to. So like, whatever. He was just kind of a guy who was Italian and then went to France and then kind of rebranded himself as French, became very powerful in the French royal court, and then was like, to cement my status, like I'll arrange these advantageous marriages. Little could he have ever dreamed that his nieces would all become super scandalicious, iconic legends. If they were all like the Martinozzi's, maybe they would have, but that's not what it was like. Anyway, so the girls came to France, and so Cardinal Mazarin was kind of, well, he was their uncle, but kind of like a father figure. And then by this time, Louis XIV was the king. He was a boy king because his father had died. So his mother, Anne of Austria, helped sort of oversee the Mazarinettes as well, because Anne of Austria and Cardinal Mazarin were work colleagues. So she was sort of like a stepmother type figure to them. And they were just kind of like training them, like, here's how you etiquette, here's how you speak French, I assume. And they just kind of waited for the girls to age up to be old enough to get married. In fact, Queen Anne personally took care of the girls' education. Yeah, so the 2 mothers of, like, there's Laura Margherita and there's Hieronima are the 2 Mazarinette moms. So Hieronima just kind of like, whatever. She's just like, this is cool, whatever. But Laura Margherita was more ambitious for her daughters. Anyway, so Anna Marie is the Mazarinette we're talking about. So when I said they were waiting for them to be old enough to be married, I mean 16. So she was married at age 16 to Armand de Bourbon, the Prince of Conti. She and her husband had 2 sons, Louis Armand and Francois Louis. Her husband died 2 years after the birth of Francois Louis. So she was like hot young widow. She acted, as the godmother by proxy to Louis XIV's son, Louis. I'm not even going to count how many people in the story called Louis. So the issue is that what I mean by godmother by proxy, and this took me a minute to figure out for myself. So Louis XIV had a son called Louis. Presumably that will be Louis XV. So the actual godmother was Henrietta Maria of France, but she was in England being busy being married to Charles I, and she was the mother of hot Charles II. So in her absence, Anna Marie was the godmother by proxy. So she just did godmother stuff like while Henrietta Maria wasn't there. Anna Marie, we don't know a lot about her. She died aged about 35 in Paris. So for all of them, I'm going to let you know like who their kids were and if anything interesting happened there. So her son, Louis, did not have children. He died at age 24, and his title passed to her second son, Francois Louis, who became Francois Louis de Bourbon, Prince of Conti, who was nicknamed Le Grand Conti. And he was a famous, sexy person who had many lovers and was a famous libertine. And in a story that, again, I'm not going down this rabbit hole, but apparently he and his wife, Marie-Thérèse de Bourbon, were named monarchs of Poland at one point. So this guy, Le Grand Conti, had multiple affairs with people of various genders, most notably with Louise Françoise de Bourbon, the wife of Louis III, Prince of Condé. Oh my God, I can't even... French history. Anyway, lots of affairs, various people, various genders. But apparently from this affair, he maybe fathered a person called Marie-Anne de Bourbon. So I love that the scandalicious genes went like directly straight to him. Mazarinettes, the next generation. So Anna Maria's descendants via Le Grand Conti include Louis Philippe I, King of the French, the present-day pretenders to the throne of France and Italy, and the kings of Spain and Belgium. So the other Martinozzi sister was Laura. So that was also their mother's name, but this is also her name. And there is going to also be other Laura, but we'll get to her later. So Laura Martinozzi, also part of the first wave of Mazarinettes to take on France. She was also married off age 16, literally on her 16th birthday, to Alfonso d'Este, the Duke of Modena. Now you might recognize the name Modena for reasons that I will explain in 30 seconds. So it was a wedding by proxy. So I guess her husband wasn't actually there, but they were just like, she's 16, let's just seal this deal, even though the groom is literally not here. So these two had 3 children, 2 of whom survived infancy, one of whom was Mary of Modena, who became the teenage second wife of James II of England, who you may remember from the story of Hortense. So Laura's husband died 7 years after their wedding, and so she was also a hot young widow, which is also just like Cardinal Mazarin was like, let's get these advantageous marriages, and the marriages are like so short-lasting. Anyway, so after her husband died, Laura became regent of Modena, which is an area in modern-day Italy, while her son was a little baby. So she was the regent. Her son is Francesco d'Este, the Duke of Modena. And then when he got old enough, she discontinued her regency, but also he fell under the influence of his half-brother, Cesare, who I guess was no good. And seeing this was happening, Laura moved back to Rome to hang out with her mother, Laura Margherita. Her son, Francesco, had no children. And we talked about her daughter, Mary of Modena, in the Hortense episodes. But to recap, she wanted to join a convent, but instead she was married off to James II, who was old and cranky, who was king of England for, I want to say, 3 years before James was overthrown by his adult daughter, Mary, and her husband, William, aka William and Mary. And so Mary of Modena, along with James, just pieced out of there, went back to France, and she had a very nice time hanging out with all of her French relatives, where Mary was popular among the courtiers. James was considered a bore. Clearly all the charisma went to Charles in that set of 2 brothers. So after James of England, the husband of Mary of Modena, died, their son, James Francis Edward, became, quote, king of, quote, England at age 13. So like the actual king or monarch of England, I'm not sure who it was exactly, but it was William and Mary. Then Mary died, then it was just William, then it was Anne. Like this whole strand, like the Stuarts that's not happening vis-a-vis being king. Anyway, so that's the Jacobites, you might know from the TV show Outlander. So they're named after James, this James. So Mary represented him, so it's kind of like a regency scenario, although he was like not actually the king of anything. And then Mary of Modena stayed in France. Her daughter died of smallpox, and then Mary died of breast cancer in 1718. Via the children of Mary of Modena, Laura Martinozzi was an ancestor of all the Bonnie Prince Charlie descendants. So that whole situation came from her side of things. So moving on to the Mancinis. As per the book Love and Louis XIV by Antonia Fraser, I'll just read a little quote here to get you ready because the Mazarinettes are here and it's amazing. Quote, with their intelligence and their Roman looks, the Mancinis were very far from being the contemporary ideal, at least in theory. It was not so much that they were dark, although it was female fairness which was constantly praised as representing perfection. It was more the Mancini's general disdain for conventions. Bear in mind, this was an era, this is me talking, the quote is done. This was an era where it was once written by a woman, modesty should be the lot of women. Your sex obliges you to obedience. Suffer much before you complain about it. And the Mancinis were kind of like, no thanks. That is not how we're going to live our lives. So the oldest Mancini is Other Laura. So when she moved to France, like they all rebranded with French names when they moved to France. So Other Laura became Laure Victoire when she moved to France. But I'm still going to call her Other Laura because that's how I wrote about her in my notes. So yeah, there was a whole thing. Who's she going to marry? She was married to Louis de Bourbon, the Duke of Mercier, and her husband was the son of the Duke of Vendôme, who was himself an illegitimate son of Henry IV of France. So, quite a prestigious husband. So she was married at age 15, so I guess they're just like, speeding things up here. Because she had married a legitimized prince of the blood, Other Laura was referred to as Serene Highness. However, she had a lower rank than that of her cousin Anna Marie, the Princess of Conti, because she had married a legitimate prince, not a prince of the blood. And these two seemed to get along. Laura and Louis, they were enamored of each other. They had 3 sons in quick succession, the eldest of which became a famous commander in the Wars of the Grand Alliance and Spanish Succession. Other Laura, however, so she married at age 15, had 3 sons, and then died age 21 as a result of childbirth to her youngest child, Jules César, who is named after Cardinal Mazarin, whose name was Jules. So Other Laura died 2 weeks after his birth, probably from that thing we've talked about before in the podcast where doctors didn't wash their hands between touching corpses and delivering babies. And Jules César also died in infancy. She was buried in Paris, and her husband retired from public life to become a cardinal. And because he was a cardinal and she was dead, they're like, well, I guess neither of us can raise these children. And so they ensured the children's upbringing to Other Laura's youngest sister, Marianne, who we'll get to later, but this is bananas because Marianne was actively 8 years old at this point. Then she became the guardian of these children who were effectively her same age. One might say, were there not several other Mazarinettes who were, at least 12? There were, but I don't know, they chose Marianne to be their guardian. Anyway, and we'll talk about Marianne last because she's the youngest. Next, this is a juicy one. Olympe Mancini, who renamed herself Olympe when she went to France. Okay, Olympe. She was a famous charmer. She was very charismatic, very beautiful, in a much more politically motivated, ambitious way than Hortense or Marie. Like, Olympe was like, if she was in Little Women, she would be Amy March, but I would say like crossed with like Lydia Bennet from Pride and Prejudice. She is just like out there making things happen. She was ready to seize every opportunity that came her way. Like, she wasn't even content to wait for the cardinal and her mother to figure out her husband. She was just like, here's what's happening. I'm going to marry the best person and I'm going to have the most amazing life. I am Olympe. I'm amazing. So I love these descriptions that people write about the comparative beauty of people from oldie times, because like, what does this even mean? Like, we can see portraits of her. They're all lovely. So Olympe was considered to be one of the less beautiful of the Mazarinettes. So like the others, like she had sort of a dark olive complexion, dark hair. Her eyes were black and vivacious. Her figure was plump and rounded. She had that stylish Phoebes sort of look. Okay, she had owl-like eyes and a long, thin nose, which earned her the nickname the Snipe. Like, okay. So the Mazarinettes just like blew into town, and Louis XIV, who is like their same age, like of course he was just like, what is happening? These children are also beautiful. And in fact, he was first connected with Olympe before he and Marie had their whole love connection. There was rumors that they had maybe even slept together before he got together with Marie, who I don't think he ever slept with. And so they were great pals / maybe lovers. They danced, gambled, and laughed together. And even though he was the king and he was like at the beginning of his sort of absolute tyrannical reign of things, like people weren't allowed to like talk back to him, but he let Olympe do it because he just liked her so much and she was so charming. She was married at the ripe old age of 19 to Prince Eugène Maurice of Savoy. Savoy being a place where Hortense went for a while. But before agreeing to this match, Olympe demanded that she be allowed to remain at French court because she loved it there. And, in fact, she was appointed superintendent of the Queen's household, which was the highest-ranking woman lady-in-waiting job, to Louis XIV's wife. So that gave her authority over and above all of the other ladies at court, with the exception of the royal princesses. Even so, even though Louis was married, he continued to visit her apartments, which became a social center for all the court. And the queen was jealous of how much attention he paid to Olympe. This is like, you can tell she's Hortense's sister. Like, I think there's at least 1 or 2 more Mazarinettes who just like start hosting salons. This is like what they do. Olympe was, by nature, an intriguer, or as we say on this podcast, a messy bitch who lived for drama. So she became involved in numerous intrigues at court, and I only know about the ones that they mentioned in the books I looked at. I'm sure there's lots of other ones that nobody wrote down. So she became really good friends with Henrietta Anne of England, who was the sister of hot Charles II, and then she married Louis XIV's younger sibling, who is Prince Philippe, who, like, if you listen to this deep dive episode, then you know all the backstory of this podcast. But on this podcast, we understand Prince Philippe to have been a trans woman. And that's all discussed in the episode where the Chevalier Dayon episode where Maya Dean schools us all on this topic. So anyway, so Henrietta, sister of Charles II, wife of Prince Philippe, and besties with Olympe. So, but Olympe is just there, just like causing drama. She's like season 1 Cheryl Blossom from Riverdale. She's just like out here, like she's like Blair Waldorf. She's just like, let's make life interesting and me the most interesting person. So Anne of Austria, Louis XIV's mother, who had sort of raised the Mazarinettes, she had arranged their education, etc., was concerned about Louis spending so much time around beautiful women, including Olympe, despite her like long nose or whatever. What happened next is that Louis then moved on. So he and Olympe were like great pals, like not just like maybe lovers, but also sort of like besties in the sense of like confidants. But Olympe became upset when Louis moved on to a woman called Louise. The story has both a Louise and 1 million Louis. So yeah, Olympe wanted to be the only person that Louis had entire trust in, like she had managed to gain that. But Louise had also been working for a long time to become his mistress / lover, and Olympe was not into that, and then we get into some of the intrigue examples. So Olympe and her lover, the Marquis de Vard, arranged for an anonymous letter to be sent to the queen informing her that Louise was Louis' new mistress. But the plan failed because the letter was never delivered. There's so many people just like living for the drama here. Louis became aware of the letter, but he never knew, or he didn't know at this point, who had written it or why, and the queen never got the letter. But then, a few years later, like 3 years later, Olympe had a falling out with her friend Henrietta of England after Henrietta had sent away Olympe's lover for insulting her. And so Olympe, in revenge, told the king that she could show him letters proving that Henrietta had been disloyal to him, and that also that Louise's honor had been compromised. So Louis went to Louise, and then Louise revealed it had been Olympe who wrote the original letter. Louis was pissed. This is all so high school-ish, just like the passing of letters. Anyway, so Olympe's lover, the Marquis de Vard, was imprisoned because he had been involved in the letter-writing scenario. And Olympe she was not like her job of mistress of the bedchamber not taken away, but she was informed that she would never be Louis' confidant anymore. Like, he'd be polite to her because of her like standing, but they would never be besties again. And in fact, by the end of that month, she and her husband had been made to feel so unwelcome at Versailles that they left to go hang out in Champagne, apparently with the widow Clicquot, I'm going to guess. But then, 1 year later, Louis invited them back. He was over it. And he was like, I hope you're going to be on your very good behavior. And she's like, I won't be. And she was not. So, for instance, in order to keep an eye on what was happening, she arranged for her husband's serving men to seduce Louise's chambermaids to provide her with spy info on what the king was up to. Louis found out about this, not impressed. She also was heard to make mocking remarks about Madame de Montespan, and so, who is Louis' lover, right? I'm not up on my French intrigue, although I'm much better than I used to be. She was, Madame de Montespan, very famously lover of Louis XIV. Anyway, Olympe insulted her, Louis was mad about it, and so she was banned from accompanying the court on its trip to northern France. There are also rumors that her lover, the Marquis, had been freed from prison, but he was instructed he was never allowed to re-enter Paris, but then there's rumors that maybe she had had a super secret sexy meeting with him near Paris. So she was just burning bridges, not like Hortense in a self-sabotaging way. This is just in a living for drama relentlessly way. And now we're just going to take a break for a word from our sponsors.
As a podcast network, our first priority has always been audio and the stories we're able to share with you. But at Realm, we also sell some pretty cool merch, and organizing that was made both possible and easy with Shopify. When you think about successful businesses like Aloe or Allbirds or Skims, an often overlooked secret is the business behind the business that makes selling and, for shoppers, buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. That's because nobody does selling better than Shopify. It's the home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not-so-secret secret that's definitely worth talking about is that Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%. That's more happy customers and way more sales going. If you're hoping to grow your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more, sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout we use with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/realm, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/realm to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/realm.
Hi, I'm Jennifer, a founder of the Go Kid Go network. At Go Kid Go, putting kids first is at the heart of every show that we produce. That's why we're so excited to introduce a brand new show to our network called The Search for the Silver Lining, a fantasy adventure series about a spirited young girl named Isla who time travels to the mythical land of Camelot. Look for The Search for the Silver Lining on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.
People often look at me with confusion when I ask them what their only one in the room story is. They think it has to be like mine, where I went to a 600-person event and discovered that I was the only Black person there. I know. Horrifying, right? Hi, I'm Laura Cathcart-Robbins, and I am the host and creator of the podcast Only One in the Room. Every week, my co-host Scott Slaughter and I invite you to join us for an hour and lose yourself in someone's only one story. This podcast is for anyone who's ever felt alone in a room full of people, which is to say that this podcast is for everyone.
And we're back. So, and then one day her husband died of just, fever and various symptoms. Although he did apparently proclaim as he was dying that he had been poisoned. So people are like, poisoned? Could he have been poisoned by Olympe? And so it's like she had such a bad reputation. People were just kind of assumed she had killed him, even though she probably didn't, because she had kind of no reason to. He was cool with her taking lovers. He was cool with her lives her drama personality. His death didn't really. She's already independently wealthy, so it's not like she needed to kill him to inherit money. So why would she have to? I don't know. Maybe she did. I don't know. Anyway, this is all happening at around the same time as the affair of the poisons, the whole thing with La Voisin from last year's Halloween super special. And so I believe La Voisin herself had mentioned Olympe's name. So a warrant went out for her to come in for questioning/arrest about maybe having poisoned her husband. But because Louis, the motives are kind of shadowy here. For some reason, Louis gave her a heads up that this was going to happen, because I don't know if he just thought she's so rich and powerful, it would be embarrassing for him if she was publicly arrested. So anyway, she was just like hanging out, overseeing a gambling session in her Paris salon when her brother-in-law, Marianne's husband, came by and was just like, guess what? Louis is going to probably arrest you. You might want to flee. And so she did. She grabbed a great quantity of jewels and cash and left with her best friend, the Marquise de Louis, and just like headed out of town. But the evidence was not super strong that she had murdered her husband. If she had stayed, she probably, there's a good chance she could have been acquitted, but she ran. So then there's a question did Louis, is this like 4-dimensional chess? Did he tip her off to run because then she would just be out of his hair and she could never return, even though, I don't know. Anyway, because no, the guy in charge of this investigation had a grudge against Olympe because years prior, she had laughed at him when he fell off of his horse while out hunting. And also when he had suggested marrying one of his children to one of her children, she was just like, no, gross. So potentially this was just a vendetta. So because she left, she's never put on trial. And so I guess she was never convicted, but she was just never allowed to return to France. So what did she do? She's another Mancini sister, just hanging out around Europe, being amazing. First she went to Brussels. And at first, the regular people on the street, they thought she was a witch. I don't know if that's again because of her big owl eyes, but it didn't matter because the rich people liked her and they welcomed her into their aristocratic circles. So the Duchess of Modena, and I double-checked the dates, and I'm pretty sure this is not the Mazarinettes. Duchess of Modena, I think she's already dead. Remember, she died super young. So it was the next Duchess of Modena. But anyway, the Duchess of Modena liked her, and so she settled in comfortably. Olympe took a new lover, the Prince of Parma, and she just hung out there for a while. She would write back to France every now and then, being like, can I return to France? And Louis, at this point, I'm sure he's getting letters from her, from Marie, from Hortense. It's just oh my God, these Mazarinettes, just what are they up to in Europe? He refused to let her return. So she eventually went to Madrid, where she became friends with the young queen, Marie Louise, who was a niece, Louis XIV. So she was the queen there because she had married the king there. She was not the queen, she didn't inherit it. Anyway, she's a young teenage girl. When Louis XIV heard about this, he was appalled at the thought of his naive young niece being under the influence of Olympe, which is, fair. If any young people I knew were hanging out with an Olympe type character, I'd just be ooh, be careful. So he got his spies to keep eyes on the situation just to make sure Marie Louise did okay. Anyway, and this might have been her intriguing. She's intrigued too hard, or it could have been she's framed from this. I don't know. Anyway, so what she did was, actually, she didn't do anything. Maybe she was intriguing too hard, and that made people frame her for something else. But the reason why she was ordered to leave Spanish court was because the King of Spain had some issues with premature ejaculation, which apparently prevented him from consummating his marriage. And he claimed that this was happening because Olympe had bewitched him. So, fine. Olympe was really? Really? So she got her friend, the imperial ambassador, to delay things so she didn't have to leave right away. She did eventually leave, and that was kind of the reason. Note, before she left, the queen, the young teenage girl, she died after having some symptoms that kind of looked a bit like the symptoms of being poisoned. And there were rumors that maybe Olympe was behind it because they knew she was on the run for maybe having poisoned people. Oh, I didn't mention also that guy who fell off the horse. He was overseeing the investigation where they're oh, we probably can't convict her for the murder of her husband. So they just started adding more charges, maybe she tried to poison Louise, or maybe she murdered some of her servants. So she's got a bit of a reputation as maybe a poisoner. But I mean, it seems clear that she did not poison this young woman, given the sense that she was never accused of it, and she's allowed to stay in Spain a bit longer, which if anyone there really thought she had poisoned her, that probably wouldn't have happened. Anyways, then she went back to Brussels, where she lived out the rest of her life, enjoying an eminent position in Brussels society, hosting a salon, where she had many visitors from her Versailles era, lots of French friends. She died in Brussels, age 70. So her children were Louis Thomas, the Count of Soissons, Philippe, the Abbot of Soissons, Louis Jules, the Cavalier of Savoy, Emmanuel Philibert, the Count of Dreux, Prince Eugène of Savoy, who is a famous general, Princess Marie-Jeanne of Savoy, Mademoiselle de Soissons, Princess Louise Philibert of Savoy, Mademoiselle de Dreux, and Princess Françoise of Savoy. So those were all the children who she left behind when she ran off from her gambling den that time. So that's Olympe. I mean, I did as deep a dive as I could, being a person who doesn't speak French. But there's some good stories to tell you. Not enough for a whole vulgar history episode, but certainly she's up there. Like, she's got a scheminess of 10 for sure. Next in age order is Marie Mancini, who we've talked about quite a bit in the Hortense episodes. We'll just kind of quickly go over what you know and then let you know a few other details. So she was born, and her given name was Anna Maria, but they changed her name to just Marie when she went to France. Apparently, her mother Hieronyma was told by an astrologer when Marie was born that Marie would cause trouble, which is part of why Hieronyma demanded when she was dying that Cardinal Mazarin should shut Marie up in a convent and keep her there. And remember, she and her mother had this very fractious relationship, which is part of why Marie had this disordered eating, which made her really slim. And in this Fubs era, that's not what people wanted to look like. She was also the darkest of all the girls, I guess. Darkest hair, most tan skin. She also had a very wide mouth. So just like she didn't look like what the common accepted feminine beauty was of the era, which is part of why her mother also didn't like her. And then, so Louis XIV was her first great love, but they could not be together. After Louis was married to Maria Theresa of Spain, Marie was exiled so as not to tempt him, and she married the Italian prince Lorenzo Onofrio Colonna, who remarked after their wedding night he was surprised to find her still a virgin, because he had not expected to find innocence among the loves of kings. So, like, the fact that people knew that she and Louis had had kind of a thing, he assumed that they would have had sex, but they had not. They had 3 sons, Filippo, Marcantonio, and Carlo, each born a year apart. After the birth of the 3rd son, relations between Marie and her husband got really shitty. We talked about that in the other episodes. So eventually, fearing, rightfully, that her husband was going to murder her, she left Rome accompanied by Hortense. Then there was the thing where Hortense published her memoir, and then someone published a false memoir claiming to be that of Marie, and so she got revenge by writing her own actual memoir, making her and Hortense some of the earliest women in France to publish their own memoirs. So she traveled around, did not return to Italy until her husband's death in 1689, and then spent a further decade traveling Europe. There's lots and lots of details about her in the book, the dual memoir about them, The King's Mistresses by Elizabeth Goldsmith. So if you want to know more about Marie, that's where you can get all the details about this era of her life, traveling around. It was just a lot of like trying to get Louis to intercede, Louis not interceding, her being in a convent, her leaving and then being in another convent. Anyway, eventually she went to Madrid, where Olympe had been. I don't think at the same time. She went to Madrid and then kept traveling again without much money, like Hortense, because of the whole like marriage dissolution. She was dependent on old noble friends. She did not see Louis again and died just a couple of months before he did in 1715. Apparently at the time that she died, her hair was nearly all white. You could see on her face that she'd been through a lot, which she had. She was 76 when she died, so a lot of years spent traveling. Understandable, her face looked older, given that she aged like a normal human person. White hair. So she's buried in Pisa at the Church of the Santo Sepolcro. Hortense Mancini comes next, chronologically, and please listen to the previous 5 hours of podcasts to learn more about her. We have to stand. So next age-wise is Philippe, honorary Mazarinette Philippe Mancini. I don't have a lot of info on Philippe, although there is a rumor that potentially Philippe Mancini had been pimped out by his uncle to deflower Prince Philippe. Let's see. So Cardinal Mazarin re-established the musketeers, the musketeers du roi, a military unit that are the same thing that they write about, that was written about by Alexandre Dumas in the story The Three Musketeers. Philippe was awarded the position of leader as a captain-lieutenant. But then, after Cardinal Mazarin died, jurisdiction of the musketeers passed to Louis XIV, who replaced Philippe with D'Artagnan from the Three Musketeers book. But Philippe, I'm sure, didn't mind. He was not interested in war and rarely accompanied the musketeers in battle. So he, as a young man, frequented the salon of Paul Scarron, and Scarron's young wife became friends with Marie Mancini. So everyone's just friends. Philippe is just like in these same social circles. In 1660, Philippe was nominated to be Duc de Nevers by his uncle with a prerogative to strike coins, but the parliament refused to register this new creation. In 1676, I guess Mazarin tried that again. And when Mazarin died, I'm not sure what happened in 1676 because Mazarin was already dead by then. Anyway, Philippe was never officially given that title. When Mazarin died, Philippe inherited just a little bit of the colossal wealth because, like, if Mazarin had liked him better, he would have given him more, but Mazarin was like a horrible person who just played everybody against everybody else, and he liked Hortense the best, and that's who got most of the stuff, including the house. But as we know, Philippe helped Hortense escape her abusive husband by providing her with horses and an escort to help her travel to Rome, where she took refuge with their sister Marie. He was a Knight of the Order of the Holy Spirit, lived to be 66 years old. His wife was Diane Gabrielle de Ma de Thianges, who is a niece of Madame de Montespan, Louis XIV's mistress, and they had 6 children, including Diane Gabrielle Victoire Mancini, Philippe Jules Francois Mancini, Diane Adelaide Philippe Mancini, and Jacques Hippolyte Mancini, who married Anne-Louise de Noël. Their only child was Marie Diane Zéphirine, who married Louis Héracles de Polignac. And I'm telling you all these names because these ones are ancestors of Albert II of Monaco through their grandson Jules François Armand de Polignac. And then finally, the final Mazarinette is Marianne, who has big youngest child energy. Like, not only had her parents given out of names or fucks when she was born, like the fact that 2 sisters are called Anne Marie and Mary Anne, but she was, she would not be ignored. Youngest child energy, very strong here. So she came in the second wave of Mazarinettes because she was so much younger. Like, the oldest, I think, was 15, and she was like 6 when this whole Mazarinettes thing started. And so the last Mazarinette, as she is referred to here. So she became the spoiled darling of the French court and of her uncle, who was greatly amused by the literary 6-year-old's verses and funny jokes. She was considered a wit and a beauty. So Cardinal Mazarin really, Hortense was his favorite, but he referred to Marianne as the wittiest and most vivacious of the sisters. So according to a contemporary, she was said to be quite divine, having infinite appeal. She was self-possessed, excelled at dancing and plays. She also loved poetry. So it's like, if you ever read The Best Christmas Pageant Ever, which is a children's book from, I think, the 70s, it's about this family called the Herdmans, and they're all just like kind of these cool, badass kids. And it's like, the younger you get, just kind of like the more cool they get. And it's because the older one teaches the younger one and then teaches the younger one. So by the time you get to the littlest one, who in that book is called Gladys, she's like the most awesome of all of them. So I think Marianne, first of all, she just learned from the example of all the other Mazarinettes. But secondly, I think also by this point, all the adult figures in all of their lives had kind of stopped micromanaging. And also, she was the youngest when Cardinal Mazarin died. So she had less time to be abused by him. And then, of course, when she was 8 years old, she became the guardian of other Laura's 3 sons who were her same age. So she was their playmate / guardian. Okay. Both men, I guess she did a good job of raising these children who were her same age. They both became soldiers. One of them eventually gained fame as a general. So she was 13 when Cardinal Mazarin died. The night before he died, the famous Field Marshal Turenne came to his bedside to ask for Marianne's hand. in the name of his nephew Godefroy Maurice de la Tour d'Auvergne, the Duc de Bouillon. And about a year later, and so I guess Cardinal Mazarin gave that permission as he died, because a year later, so when she was 14, I guess, 14 or 15, those two got married in the presence of King Louis XIV. So all the Mazarinettes all married off. Like, Mazarin's whole plan has happened, and they all got, like, on paper, at least wealthy and influential husbands, even if at least two of them were horrible. Her husband, so Godefroy, I don't know how you'd say that in a French accent, was apparently a good soldier, but a bad courtier and an even worse literary man. So Marianne, 15 years old, like, remember, she loves courtly things, she loves dancing, she loves poetry, she loves literature. So she's really left on her own to pursue her political and literary interests, such as establishing a small salon at her residence. And yeah, so she became the patron of lots of writers, literary people. Like, again, you can see, like, she's not exactly the same trajectory as Hortense, but you can see the similarity in these siblings. Like, if you put Marianne and Olympe together, you get kind of like Hortense. But even though they fundamentally had nothing in common, she and her husband had an harmonious marriage. He loved her and was tolerant of her love affairs. At one point, her family wanted her to be incarcerated in a convent, but he refused to do that because he just, like, loved her so much. On one occasion, she herself took refuge in a convent out of fear for his family after a particularly public love affair. Godefroy himself asked her to leave the convent and return to him. So he's, like, an okay husband. She also, Marianne, got caught up with La Voisin and the affair of the poisons. So what happened is that Adam Lesage, who was, like, La Voisin's kind of rival, testified that Marianne had come to see him. And the way that he did his, like, fortune telling is people would write things on a piece of paper, then he would, like, burn that piece of paper, and that would make the thing that they wrote happen. And so he said with Marianne, he'd gotten her to write her desires on a piece of paper, and she had written down, "I want you to kill my husband so I can marry my lover, Vendôme," who would actually come with her lover. And Adam Lesage claimed she'd come to him several times afterwards wanting to know if he could do it or not. Everything I've just said, it's just like, this doesn't sound like a husband that she would really want to get rid of, really. Anyway, so she was summoned to come in and testify in the case. Unlike her sister, she did not flee the country, but instead she went full Fredegund on this in the most spectacular way. So everybody's really excited because she was a famous Mazarinette, and I think after going through all these stories, you understand why. It's not just like Hortense was so notorious and famous, but, like, Marie also was, like, Olympe, just, like, what everyone is up to. It's like, oh my God, another Mazarinette scandal. Everyone's so excited. So people are just like, but I wonder what she did. Like, no one knew what she was being accused of doing. There was a rumor that she maybe poisoned her servants who knew too much about her infidelities, but then they were like, but everyone knows about her infidelities. So, like, why would she kill them? Anyway, so she arrived to testify with her husband on one arm and her lover, Vendôme, on the other arm. Like, just big Fredegund energy. Remember when she walked in with the 300 witnesses? Similar effect here. She was just like, oh, you think I wanted to murder my husband so I could be with my lover? Guess what? I'm here with my husband and my lover, who both love and support me. So she had, like, supporters waiting outside. I just picture it sort of like the Free Britney movement type, just like a really positive crowd outside who's just like, you're our queen, we love you. She entered the chambers and then took off her gloves to show off her hands. I didn't mention this, but the one sister had the long nose, the one sister has the big eyes, and her big thing was she had really little hands and feet, which were, like, I guess along with a fub's physique was really what you wanted in a woman. So she just took off her gloves to be like, look at these hands, to show off, you know, her great feature. When they began asking her questions, she responded in a laughing and disdainful manner. And I think she also made a statement at the beginning being like, let the record show, I'm not here because, like, the magistrate called me in. I'm just here because the king asked me personally. So, like, bring it on. So what her version of events was, she said, yes, she had seen Lesage. And she explained, like, she and Vendôme went there together. And they had just written just kind of like joke questions down for fun. And Lesage seemed to burn them, but a few days later, he still had the papers and gave the note back to her. And she's like, oh my God, how did you do that? How's that magic trick work? So she got him to perform the trick again. So she wrote on a piece of paper, and then he burned it, but he never gave it back this time. So she sent a servant girl to get the paper back, but anyway, he wouldn't get the paper back. So that's her version of, like, the, like, badgering him to try and get stuff. Anyway, she told her side of the story, and then when she finished, she was like, Messieurs, is that all you have to say to me? And then on being told she could leave, she said, "Truly, I would never have believed that clever man could ask such stupid things." She went outside to rapturous applause from her fans, who were all just adoring the way that she refused to be intimidated. Like, they love a Mazarinette moment. Imagine, with all this stuff, like getting to be there for a Mazarinette epic moment. And she was really proud of how she had done. She started recounting, like, all the witty things she remembers saying. Because remember, even as a child, she was known for telling, like, witty jokes. She claimed that one of the things she had said was, when someone asked, "Have you ever seen the devil?" she claimed to have replied, "Yes, I've seen him, and he looked just like you." Epic. And honestly, her husband, Godefroy, just like, I love this relationship for her. He was so proud of how she'd done. He asked the king if he could write a transcript of the whole hearing so he could distribute it around Europe so everyone would know how funny she was, but the king refused. So, like, why would you ever murder this husband? So she was not convicted, but she was ordered to leave Paris, which she did, but in kind of like a Caroline of Brunswick move. Like, she turned her departure into like a triumphant parade with like all the fans cheering as she left. She was able to return to Paris in the royal court a few years later. And like, just because of like how fearless she had been, her funny jokes, like, she was admired by the other aristocrats. But the king had just like turned against her. Like, Louis, by this point, like, that he's not doing well, and he's just like anti-Mazarinettes when they're clearly the coolest people he ever met. So in 1685, he banished her to the provinces once more. I didn't write down what for, but I'm sure just like probably saying a joke, considering how sensitive this guy is. So she was banished to the provinces for 5 years. Finally, he was allowed to return permanently, but she was just like, I choose to not hang out at royal court. Instead, she presided over her salon, like the queen that she was, visited by poets and artists, just like having a nice time. So she lived to be 65 years old, and her children were Louis Charles de la Tour d'Auvergne, Marie Elizabeth de la Tour d'Auvergne, Emmanuel Théodose de la Tour d'Auvergne, Eugène Maurice de la Tour d'Auvergne, Frédéric Jules de la Tour d'Auvergne, and Louise Julie de la Tour d'Auvergne. So I don't have any interesting them being the ancestors of anyone, but just, the Mazarinettes, the next generation Mazarinettes, got it done. So yeah, that's just I don't know, it's not quite super special. It's kind of like an epilogue to the Hortense saga. Just keeping with the Mazarinettes. Fucking love them. I don't know. This won't be official, but I'm going to score them as a group, which I would say, and unofficially as well, I would put Godefroy in the Lady Jane Seymour Memorial Award for Outstanding Supporting Performance, because so unofficially, I'm going to put him in here, because I didn't do technically a whole Marianne episode, but he was cool. So, scandaliciousness of the Mazarinettes as a group, 10. Scheminess of the Mazarinettes as a group, like Olympe, is a 10. Marianne, a 7. Some of the others, a 3. I think it's going to I don't know. Olympe was just real. I don't know. I'm going to give it a 6 overall. The significance of the Mazarinettes to society of the time, pretty major. Marie with writing the book, if we're including Hortense, everything she did. All of them having the salons, just showing that you can be a tits out woman and just do your own thing, and it's amazing. I don't know. The significance, I'm going to say a 6. And the sexism bonus. They were all married off as young teenagers. I don't know, but they did cool stuff too. I'm just going to give them a standard of 5 for sexism. So the Mazarinettes as a group, what is this? 27. I'm going to put that on my list, but I'm going to put it in brackets because it's kind of because this is a super special, not a real episode. So, thank you all for listening. Next week, we're going to be talking about someone new. But thank you for sitting with me these last 6 episodes. Who would have thought that Sailor Moon hairdo would lead us down this dramatic road we've all been down? So thank you all for listening. If you have feedback or comments, you can contact me at vulgarhistory.com or send me a DM on Instagram at vulgarhistorypod, where I also post pictures and things, polls in the stories, etc. I'm also on Twitter at vulgarhistory. You can support me and the podcast at patreon.com/AnnFosterWriter, where we have the bonus episodes. Oh, I told you I wasn't doing Cardinal Mazarin, but that's because I'm going to be doing Louis XIV. So that's maybe by the time this comes out, that will be on there for you to listen to. So there's also Louis XIV And keeping with the French theme, I also think by the time this comes out, the next episode of Vulgar Peace Theater will be there, where myself, Alison Epstein, Lana Wood Johnson are talking about the Hugh Jackman Les Miserables movie. Just really getting all my French stuff out. Like, I hope you could tell how much I enjoyed pronouncing all these French names. And oh yeah, if you go to the vulgarhistory.store, like literally vulgarhistory.store, we've got new merch there from the whole thing. We've got the Hortense Salon t-shirts, shot glasses, various things. And then also the Mazarinettes merch, which just says like Les Mazarinettes. There's sort of like an astrological inspired feminine silhouette on it because, I don't know, Marie wrote a book about astrology. Their father was a necromancer. Like, it's just like, I like to represent the Mazarinettes. Such icons. I'm so glad I learned about them. Thank you all for listening to Vulgar History. And I'll talk to you next week, so keep your pants on and your tits out. Vulgar History is hosted, written, and researched by Anne Foster, and edited by Christina Lumagi.
Talmor, Sheshin Marachi. Talmor is my home. My family have worked the land for generations. My gran says the island does not belong to us, but we belong to the island. And we must be ready, for a great evil is coming, and death follows with it.
Listen and subscribe to the latest season of Undertow, The Harrowing, a Storyglass production presented by Realm, available wherever you get your podcasts.
Contained herein are the heresies of Redolphe Bantwine, erstwhile monk turned traveling medical investigator. Join me as I study the secrets of the divine plagues and uncover the blasphemous truth that ours is not a loving God, and we are not its favored children. The heresies of Redolphe Bantwine, wherever podcasts are available.